The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance introduces viewers to concepts concerning law and power and how they relate to each other. Hobbes, in his Leviathan, proposes an explanation to this question. By understanding the concepts of freedom and power as it relates to human beings, Hobbes proposes that society and the state are byproducts of the human desire to live. Thus, the understanding of the state must, in Hobbes' perspective at least, be seen through this lens. Now, because of this, according to Hobbesian principles concerning the nature of the state and of man, the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance's theme is correct. The state ultimately holds the right to use violence to maintain justice. In this PS10 talk, I will be using The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance scene taking place from the 57-minute and 36-second mark to the 1 hour and 45-second mark. Now, one question that Hobbes poses is, how is authority legitimized? And although there are established guidelines in society, what we would refer to as laws, within the movie it is unrecognized by the people. This can be clearly seen in Tom's response to Ransom saying, "That's right, but votes won't stand up against guns." Now this line clearly indicates that, according to the people, the laws essentially mean nothing in comparison to the threats that Liberty Valance and his cronies pose. Now because of this, the law is seen clearly as delegitimized because it's seen as completely ineffective. And although throughout the movie Ransom upholds the laws as the ultimate authority, he is the only person to do so. Now, if the laws cannot be enforced, then it lacks the capacity to affect society and the people. And because power quite literally is the capacity to act on something, if the laws lack the ability to affect society and the people, then the laws effectively have no power. If the laws have no power, then there's no way it can be considered legitimate or authoritative. It is just an arbitrary set of words that effectively mean nothing. Therefore, in order to establish itself as authoritative, the law must retain the capacity to enact and uphold itself over the people. Now, in order for the law to be considered authoritative and thus legitimate, its constituent people must recognize it as such. But why does authority come from the constituent people? Well, that's because the law is designed to affect specifically them. Thus, the law's effectiveness is directly drawn from how much their constituents are willing to adhere to them. This can be seen through Tom's plea to Marshal Appleyard. "Oh, Appleyard, you think Valance stays away from here because he's scared of you? He's out recruiting hired guns for the big ranchers." The law requires people to carry itself out. The laws themselves have no power. The people must be convinced in order to uphold the laws. The laws act through people in order to achieve ends. The law does not inherently hold power, but it can exercise it through people as a medium because people do have the capacity to act and thus hold power. This can be clearly seen in the lack of power that is held within Marshal Appleyard. Because Appleyard lacks the capacity to act in opposition to Liberty Valance, according to Liberty Valance, the law means nothing to him. He can do effectively whatever he wants. And while the law does not inherently hold power and can only exercise through people, this can also be reflected in some sentiments said by what Ransom says to Hallie. You hear what Tom said? "When force threatens, talk's no good anymore. Hallie, you go find Tom and make it up to him. He's only trying to protect you." The power that people have, as determined by Hobbes, completely remains within the material realm of physical action. Within this context of this specific line, when he says "talk's no good anymore," this is clearly in reference to how physical force is ultimately the primary thing that gets people to act in specific ways. Talks, or in reference to into verbal words, effectively don't have any meaning in comparison to absolute force. People are more willing to adhere to absolute force than to rationale and reason. In fact, it is this quality that the only power that people actually have completely remains within the material realm. It is this that ultimately convinces Hobbes that in the natural state, all men are effectively equal. To quote Hobbes' Leviathan, page 86 and 87. Nature hath made men so equal in the faculties of body and mind, as that thought there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body, or of quicker mind than another. Yet when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable, as that one man can thereupon claim to himself any strength of body. The weakest hath strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with himself. Now, what this passage clearly indicates is that people are equal because people have the same access to physical power as do each other. And as Hobbes notes, the only actions a human can take are physical changes to the material world. And within a social context, this physical action manifests itself in the capacity for violence. People will only submit to a power if it proves greater than their own, and people will not submit to a lesser power. Thus, in order for the law to hold authority, it must hold power over its constituents. To exhibit power over people, the law must demonstrate a capacity for violence towards that people. Only then will people submit to its authority. And once people submit and recognize the authority of the law, it then can be considered legitimate. What we can see within the scene is that Tom erases a phrase on the board. He erases the phrase that education is the basis of law and order. Now, this erasure serves as a symbolic statement in that education is not necessarily the basis of law and order. Rather, it is the physical action and supremacy of power within the law and within the state that provides the basis of law and order. It is only this submission to this greater power of the state that allows law and order to exist. Without this power, law and order cannot exist. However, an important thing to note is that people will only submit to a power so long as they can benefit from it. Hobbes explains this as the basis of the social contract. To quote Leviathan, page 93, "Whensoever a man transferreth his right, or renounceth it, it is either in consideration of some right reciprocally transferred to himself, or for some other good he hopeth for thereby. For it is a voluntary act, and of the voluntary acts of every man, the object is some good to himself." Now, if a power proves tyrannical, it is possible for the people to regain greater power. This can simply be done through a united effort of the people. Greater numbers produce greater power. Thus, the state, in order to hold its legitimate authority over the people, must work to achieve it. This appeasement in society is called justice. Hobbes affirms that justice is not a fixed concept like Plato described it to be. Rather, justice is a completely arbitrary measure of satisfaction among the people. Something is just if the people claim it to be so. And as the law must reflect the general will of the people, the law itself determines justice. Ultimately, Hobbes argues that the state must hold and exhibit power for justice to even exist. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, no injustice. Leviathan, page 90. Thus, it can be stated that any action taken by the state and the law that itself is judged favorably by the people is, in fact, just. And this includes violent actions. Thus, in conclusion, the state functions primarily through the jurisdiction of the law, which itself relies on the power of the people to hold authority. Given that the power of the people is directly correlated to physical capabilities, the law thus can only be legitimized through physical force, which in society manifests as violence. However, this application of power cannot be abused, for if the people are unsatisfied with the state, an injustice will be declared and power will rise up to combat it. Thus, if people and the law agree that a force of violence was conducted in justice, then that justice will have been affirmed and legitimized. In this way, the state has the right to use violence in order to uphold its own authority and to maintain justice as deemed fit by the people. I'm Jeff Lee, and thank you for coming to my PS10 talk.